Hello, my friends. It's Indiana Homes for Story Time, and we continue with our book, A Damsel in Distress. We pick it up today with Chapter 6. At about the time that George Bevan's train was leaving Waterloo, a gray racing car drove up with a grinding of brakes and sputter of gravel in front of the main entrance of Belpher Castle. The slim and elegant young man at the wheel removed his goggles, pulled out a watch, and addressed the stout young man at his side. 2 hours and 18 minutes from Hyde Park Corner. Boots. No, not so dusty. His companion made no reply. He appeared to be plunged in thought. He too removed his goggles, revealing a florid and gloomy face, equipped in addition to the usual features with a small mustache and an extra chin. He scowled forbiddingly at the charming scene which the goggles had hidden from him. Before him, a symmetrical mass of gray stone and green ivy, Belpher Castle, towered against the blue sky. On either side of the rolling park, land spread as far as the eye could see, carpeted here and there with violets, dotted with great oaks and ashes and Spanish chestnuts, orderly, peaceful, and English. Nearer on his left were rose gardens, in the center of which, tilted at a sharp angle, appeared the seat a pair of corduroy trousers, whose wearers seemed to be engaged in hunting for snails. Thrushes sang in the green shrubberies, rauks cawed at the elms. Somewhere in the distance sounded the tinkle of sheep bells and the lowing of cows. It was, in fact, a scene which, lit by the evening sun of a perfect spring day and fanned by a gentle westerly wind, should have brought balm and soothing meditations to one who was the sole heir to all this paradise. But Percy, Lord Belpher, remained uncomforted by the notable cooperation of man and nature, and drew no solace from the reflection that all these pleasant things would one day be his own. His mind was occupied, at the moment, to the exclusion of all other thoughts, by the recollection of that painful scene in Bow Street Police Court. The magistrate's remarks, which had been tactless and unsympathetic, still echoed in his ears, and that infernal night in Vine Street Police Station, the darkness, the hard bed, the discordant vocalizing of the drunk and the disorderly in the next cell. Time might soften those memories, might lessen the sharp agony of them, but nothing could remove them altogether. Percy had been shaken to the core of his being. Physically, he was still stiff and sore from the plank bed. Mentally, he was a volcano. He had been marched up the Haymarket in full sight of all London by a bounder of a policeman. He had been talked to like an erring child by a magistrate whom nothing could convince that he had not been under the influence of alcohol at the moment of his arrest. The man had said things about his liver. Kindly be warned in time and pulled up before it is a little too late, which would have seemed to Percy indecently frank if spoken by his medical adviser in the privacy of the sick chamber. It is perhaps not to be wondered at the Belpher Castle, for all its beauty of scenery and architecture should have left Lord Belpher a little cold. He was seething with fury, which the conversation of Reggie Byng had done nothing to allay in the course of the journey from London. Reggie was the last person he would have willingly chosen as a companion in his hour of darkness. Reggie was not soothing. He would insist on addressing him by his old Eton nickname of Boots, which Percy detested, and all the way down he had been breaking out at intervals into ribald comments on the recent unfortunate occurrence, which were very hard to bear. He resumed this vein as they alighted and rang the bell. "This," said Reggie, "is rather like a bit of melodrama. Convict son totters up the steps of the old home and punches the bell. What awaits him beyond? Forgiveness or a raspberry. True, the white-haired butler, who knew him as a child, as a child, will sob on his neck. But what of the old dad? How will Dad take the blot of the family scandal? Lord Belpher's scowl deepened. It's not a joking matter, he said coldly. Great heavens, I'm not joking. How could I have the heart to joke at a moment like this, when the friend of my youth has suddenly become a social leper? I wish to goodness you would stop. Do you think it is any pleasure to me to be seen about with a man who is now known as a criminal in circles such as Percy, the Piccadilly policeman puncher? I keep a brave face before the world, but inwardly I burn with shame and agony and what not. The great door of the castle swung open, revealing Keggs, the butler. He was a man of revered years, portly and dignified, with a respectfully benevolent face that beamed gravely on the young master and Mr. Byng, as if their coming had filled his cup of pleasure. His light, slightly protruding eyes expressed reverential goodwill. He gave just that touch of cozy humanity to the scene which the hall, with its half lights and massive furniture, needed to make it perfect to the returned wanderer. He seemed to be intimating that this was a moment to which he had looked forward long, and that from now on quiet happiness would reign supreme. It was, or it is, distressing to have to reveal the jarring fact that, in his hours of privacy when off duty, this apparently ideal servitor was so far from being a respecter of persons that he was accustomed to speak of Lord Belpher as Percy, and even as his Nibs. It was, indeed, an open secret among the upper servants at the castle, and a fact hinted at with awe among the lower, that Keggs was at heart a socialist. Good evening, your lordship. Good evening, sir. Lord Belpher acknowledged the salutation with a grunt, but Reggie was more affable. How are you, Keggs? Now's your time. If you're going to do it. He stepped a little to one side and indicated Lord Belpher's crimson neck with an inviting gesture. I beg your pardon, sir. Ah, you'd rather wait till you can do it a little bit more privately. Perhaps you're right. The butler smiled indulgently. He did not understand what Reggie was talking about, but that did not worry him. He had long since come to the conclusion that Reggie was slightly mad, a theory supported by the latter's valet, who was of the same opinion. Keggs did not dislike Reggie, but intellectually he considered him negligible. Send something to drink into the library, Keggs, said Lord Belpher. Very good, your lordship. A topping idea, said Reggie. I'll just take the old car round to the garage, and then I'll be with you. He climbed to the steering wheel and started the engine. Lord Belpher proceeded to the library, while Keggs melted away through the green baize door at the end of the hall, which divided the servants' quarters from the rest of the house. Reggie had hardly driven a dozen yards when he perceived his stepmother and Lord Marshmoreton coming towards him from the direction of the rose garden. He drew up to greet them. Hello, mater. What ho, uncle? Back again at the old homestead? What? Beneath Lady Caroline's aristocratic front, agitation seemed to lurk. Reggie, where is Percy? Old Boots, I think he's gone to the library. I just decanted him out of the car. Lady Caroline turned to her brother. Let us go to the library, John. All right, said Lord Marshmoreton irritably. Something appeared to have ruffled his calm. Reggie drove on. As he was strolling back after putting the car away, he met Maud. Hello, Maud, dear old thing. Why, hello, Reggie. I was expecting you back last night. Couldn't get back last night. Had to stick in town and rally round old Boots. Couldn't desert the old boy in his hour of trial. Reggie chuckled amusedly. Hour of trial is rather good. What? What I mean to say is that's just what it is. Don't you know? Why, what happened to Percy? Do you mean to say you haven't heard? Of course not. It wouldn't have been in the morning papers. Why? Percy punched a policeman. Percy did what? Slugged a slop. Most dramatic thing. Sloshed him in the midriff. Absolutely. The cross marks the spot where the tragedy occurred. Maud caught her breath. Somehow, though she could not trace the connection, she felt that this extraordinary happening must be linked with her escapade. Then her sense of humor got better with apprehension. Her eyes twinkled delightedly. You don't mean to say Percy did that? Absolutely. The human tiger and whatnot. Menace to society and all that sort of thing. No holding him. For some unexplained reason, the generous blood of the Belfers boiled over, and then zing! They jerked him right off to the Vine Street jail. Like the poem, don't you know? And poor old Percy the walked between the guards upon his wrists. And this morning, bright and early, the beak parted him from 10 quid. You know, Maud, old thing, our duty stares us plainly in the eyeball. We've got to train old Boots down to a reasonable weight and spring him on the National Sporting Club. We've been letting a champion middleweight blush unseen under our very roof tree. Maud hesitated a minute. I suppose you don't know, she asked carelessly, why he did it? I mean, did he tell you anything? Couldn't get a word out of him. Oysters, garrulous, and Tombs chatty in comparison. Absolutely. All I know is that he popped one into the officer's waistband. What led up to this is more than I can tell you. How would it be to stagger to the library and join the post-mortem? The post-mortem? Well, I met the mater and his lordship on the way to the library, and it took me very much as if the mater must have got hold of the evening paper on her journey from town. When did she arrive? Only a while ago. Then that's what happened. She would have bought an evening paper and read it on the train. By Jove, I wonder if she got hold of one that had the poem about it. One chappie was so carried away by the beauty of the episode that he treated it in verse. I think we ought to look into it and see what's happening. Maud hesitated again, but she was a girl of spirit, and she had an intuition that her best defense would be attack. Bluff was what was needed. Wide-eyed, innocent wonder. After all, Percy couldn't be certain he had seen her in Piccadilly. All right. By the way, dear old girl, inquired Reggie, did your little business come out satisfactorily? I forgot to ask. Not very, but it was awfully sweet of you to take me into the town. How would it be, said Reggie nervously, not to dwell too much on that part of it? What I mean to say is, for heaven's sake, don't let the matter now, and, I rallied round, so don't let it bother you. Don't worry, said Maud with a laugh. I'm not going to talk about the thing at all. Lord Belpher, meanwhile in the library, had begun with an aid of whiskey and soda to feel a little better. There was something about the library with its somber half-tones that soothed his bruised spirit. The room held something of the peace of a deserted city. The world, with its violent adventures and tall policemen, did not enter here. There was balm in those rows and rows of books, which nobody ever read, those vast writing tables at which nobody ever wrote. From the broad mantelpiece, the bust of some unnamed ancient looked down almost sympathetically. Something remotely resembling peace had begun to steal into Percy's soul, and it was expelled by the abrupt opening of a door and the entry of Lady Caroline Byng and his father. One glance at the face of the former was enough to tell Lord Belpher that she knew all. He rose defensively. Let me explain. Lady Caroline quivered with repressed emotion. This masterly woman had not lost control of herself, but her aristocratic calm had seldom been so severely tested. As Reggie had surmised, she had read the report of the proceedings in the evening paper in the train, and her world had been reeling ever since. Caesar, stabbed by Brutus, could scarcely have experienced a greater shock. The other members of her family had disappointed her often. She had become injured to the spectacle of her brother working in the garden in corduroy trousers, and in other ways behaving in a manner beneath the dignity of an Earl of Marshmoreton. She had resigned herself to the innate flaw in the character of Maud, which had allowed her to fall in love with nobody whom she met without an introduction. Even Reggie had exhibited at times democratic traits which she thoroughly disapproved. But of her nephew, Percy, she had always been sure. He was solid rock. He, at least, she had always felt, would never do anything to injure the family prestige. And now, so to speak, lo Ben Adam's name led all the rest. In other words, Percy was the worst of the lot. Whatever indiscretions the rest had committed, at least they had never got the family into the comic columns of the evening papers. Lord Marshmoreton might wear corduroy trousers and refuse to entertain the county at garden parties, and go to bed with a book when it was his duty to act as a host at a formal ball. Maud might give her heart to an impossible person whom nobody had ever heard of, and Reggie might be seen at fashionable restaurants with pugilists, but at any rate, evening paper poets had never written facetious verses about their exploits. This crowning degradation had been reserved for the hitherto blameless Percy, who, of all the young men of Lady Caroline's acquaintance, had till now appeared to have the most scrupulous sense of his position, the most rigid regard for the dignity of the great name. Yet here he was, if the carefully considered reports in the daily press were to be believed, spending his time in the very spring tide of his life, running about London like a frenzied Hottentot, brutally assaulting the police. Lady Caroline felt as a bishop might feel if he suddenly discovered that some favorite curate had gone over to the worship of Mumbo Jumbo. "Explain?" she cried. "How can you explain? You, my nephew, the heir to the title, behaving like a common rowdy in the streets of London, your name in the papers. If you knew the circumstances, they are in the evening paper, they are in print, in verse," added Lord Marshmoreton. He chuckled amiably at the recollection. He was an easily amused man. "You ought to read it, my boy. Some of it was capital." "John!" "But deplorable, of course," added Lord Marshmoreton hastily. "Very deplorable." He endeavored to rein his sister's esteem by show of righteous indignation. "What do you mean by it? Damn it! You are my only son. I have to watch you grow from child to boy, from boy to man, with tender solicitude. I have wanted to be proud of you, and all the time, dash it, you are prowling about London like a lion, seeking whom you may devour, terrorizing the metropolis, putting harmless policemen in fear of their lives." "Will you listen to me for a moment?" shouted Percy. He began to speak rapidly, as one conscious of the necessity of saying his say. Will the saying be good? "The facts are these. I was walking along Piccadilly on my way to lunch at the club, when near Burlington Arcade I was amazed to see Maud." Lady Caroline uttered exclamation. "Maud! But Maud was there? I can't understand it," went on Lord Marshmoreton, pursuing his remarks. Righteous indignation had, he felt, gone well. It might be judicious to continue in that vein, though privately he held the opinion that nothing in Percy's life so became him as this assault on the force. Lord Marshmoreton, who in his time had committed all the follies of youth, had come to look on his blameless son as scarcely human. "It's not as if you were wild. You've never got into any scrapes at Oxford. You've spent your time collecting old china and prayer rugs. You wear flannel next to your skin." "Will you please be quiet?" said Lady Caroline impatiently. "Go on, Percy." "Oh, very well," said Lord Marshmoreton. I merely made a remark. You say you saw Maud in Piccadilly, Percy?" "Precisely. I was on the point of putting it down to an extraordinary resemblance, when suddenly she got into a cab. Then I knew." Lord Marshmoreton could not permit this to pass in silence. He was a fair-minded man. "Why shouldn't the girl have got into a cab? Why must a girl walking along Piccadilly be my daughter Maud just because she got into a cab? London, in London." "London," he proceeded, warming to the argument and thrilled by the clearness and coherence of his reasoning. "London is full of girls who take cabs." "She didn't take a cab." "You just said she did." Lord Marshmoreton cleverly. "I said she got into a cab. There was somebody else already in the cab. A man, Aunt Caroline. It was the man." "Good gracious!" ejaculated Lady Caroline, falling into a chair as if she had been hamstrung. "I am absolutely convinced of it," proceeded Lord Belpher solemnly. "His behavior was enough to confirm my suspicions. The cab had stopped in a block of traffic, and I went up and requested him, in a perfectly civil manner, to allow me to look at the lady who had just got in. He denied that there was a lady in the cab, and I had seen her jump in with my own eyes. Throughout the conversation, he was leaning out of the window with obvious intention of screening whoever was inside from my view. I followed him along Piccadilly in another cab and tracked him to the Carlton. When I arrived there, he was standing on the pavement outside. There were no signs of Maud. I demanded he tell me her whereabouts." "That reminds me," said Lord Marshmoreton cheerfully, "of a story I read in one of the papers. I dare say it's old. Stop me if you've heard it. A woman says to the maid, 'Do you know anything of my husband's whereabouts?' And the maid replies—" "Do be quiet," snapped Lady Caroline. "I should have thought that you would be interested in a matter affecting the vital welfare of your very own daughter. Your only daughter." I am," said Lord Marshmoreton hastily. The maid replied, "They are at the wash. Of course I am. Go on, Percy." "Good God, boy, don't take all day telling us your story." At that moment, the fool of a policeman came up and wanted to know what was the matter. I lost my head. I admit it freely. The policeman grasped my shoulder and I struck him. "Where?" said Lord Marshmoreton. "A stickler for detail." "What does that matter?" demanded Lady Caroline. "You did quite right, Percy. These insolent jacks in office ought to not be allowed to manhandle people. Tell me what this man was like." "Extremely ordinary looking. In fact, all I can remember about him was that he was clean-shaven. I cannot understand how Maud could have come to lose her head over such a man. He seemed to me to have no attraction whatsoever," said Lord Belpher, a little unreasonably, "for Apollo himself would hardly appear attractive when knocking on one's best hat off." "It must have been the same man." "Precisely. If we wanted further proof, he was an American. You recollect that we heard that the man in Wales was American." There was a portentous silence. Percy stared at the floor. Lady Caroline breathed deeply. Lord Marshmoreton, feeling that something was expected of him, said, "Good God!" and gazed seriously at a stuffed owl on a bracket. Maud and Reggie came in. "What ho, what ho, what ho," said Reggie breezily, he always believing in starting a conversation well and putting people at ease. "What ho, what ho." Maud braced herself for the encounter. "Hello, Percy dear," she said, meeting her brother's accusing eye with the perfect composure that comes from only a thoroughly guilty conscience. "What's all this I hear about your being the scourge of London? Reggie says the policeman Reggie says that policemen dive down manholes when they see you coming. The chill in the air would have daunted a less courageous girl. Lady Caroline had risen and was staring sternly. Percy was puffing, the puffs of an overwrought soul. Lord Marshmoreton, whose thoughts had wandered off to the rose garden, pulled himself together and tried to look menacing. Maud went on without waiting for a reply. She was all bubbling gaiety and insolence, a charming picture of young English girlhood that nearly made her brother foam at the mouth. "Father dear," she said, attaching herself affectionately to his buttonhole, "I went round the links in 83 this morning. I did the long hole in 4, one under par, a thing I've never done before in my life." "Bless my soul," said Lord Marshmoreton weakly, as, with apprehensive eye on his sister, he patted his daughter's shoulder. "First, I sent a screecher of a drive right down the middle of the fairway. Then I took my brassy and I put the ball just on the edge of the green. 180 yards it was if it was an inch. My approach putt." Lady Caroline, who was no devotee of the royal and ancient game, interrupted the recital. "Never mind what you did this morning. What did you do yesterday afternoon?" "Yes," said Lord Belpher. "Where were you yesterday afternoon?" Maud's gaze was the gaze of a young child who has never even attempted to put anything over on in as little as they could in this life. "Whatever do you mean?" "What were you doing in Piccadilly yesterday afternoon?" said Lady Caroline. "Piccadilly? The place where Percy fights policemen? I don't understand." Lady Caroline was no sportsman. She put one of those direct questions capable of being answered only by yes or no, which ought not to be allowed in controversy. They are the verbal equivalent of shooting a sitting bird. "Did you or did you not go to London yesterday, Maud?" The monstrous unfairness of this method of attack pinned Maud. From childhood up to now, she held the customary feminine views upon the lie direct. As long as she was a question of suppression, of a true or suggestion, of false, she had no scruples. But she had a distaste for deliberate falsehood. Faced now with a choice between two evils, she chose the one which would at least leave her some self-respect. "Yes, I did." Lady Caroline looked at Lord Belpher. Lord Belpher looked at Lady Caroline. "You went to meet that American of yours." Reggie Byng slid softly from the room. He felt that he would be happier elsewhere. He had been an acutely embarrassed spectator of this distressing scene, and had been passing the time by shuffling his feet, playing with his coat buttons, and perspiring. "Don't go, Reggie," said Lord Belpher. "Well, what I mean to say is family row and whatnot, if you see what I mean. I've one or two things I ought to do." He vanished. Lord Belpher frowned a somber frown. "Then it was that man who knocked my hat off?" "What do you mean?" said Lady Caroline. "Knocked your hat off?" "You never told me he knocked your hat off." "It was when I was asking him to let me look inside the cab. I had grasped the handle of the door when he suddenly struck my hat, causing it to fly off, and while I was picking it up, he drove away. He drove right away." CK exploded. Lord Marshmoreton. CK. He twisted his face by a supreme exertion of what will power into a mask of indignation. "You ought to have had the scoundrel arrested," he said vehemently. "It was a technical assault. The man who knocked off your hat, Percy," said Maud, "was not. He was a different man altogether, a stranger." "As if you would be in a cab with a stranger," said Lady Caroline caustically. "There are limits, I hope, to even your indiscretions." Lord Marshmoreton cleared his throat. He was sorry for Maud, whom he loved. Now, looking at the matter broadly, be quiet, said Lady Caroline. Lord Marshmoreton subsided. I want to avoid you, said Maud, so I jumped into the first cab I saw. I don't believe it, said Percy. It's the truth. You are simply trying to put us off the scent. Lady Caroline turned to Maud. Her manner was plaintive. She looked like a martyr at the stake who deprecatingly lodges a timid complaint, fearful, though fearful the while lest she may be hurting the feelings of her persecutors by appearing even for a moment out of sympathy with their activities. My dear child, why will you not be reasonable in this matter? Why will you not let yourself be guided by those who are older and wiser than you? Exactly, said Lord Belpher. The whole thing is too absurd. Precisely, said Lord Belpher. Lady Caroline turned to him irritably. Please do not interrupt, Percy. Now you've made me forget what I was going to say. To my mind, said Lord Marshmoreton, coming to the surface once more, the proper attitude to adopt on occasions like the present. Please, said Lady Caroline. Lord Marshmoreton stopped and resumed his silent communion with the stuffed bird. You can't stop yourself being in love, Aunt Caroline, said Maud. You can be stopped if you've somebody with a level head looking after you. Lord Marshmoreton tore himself away from the bird. Why, when I was at Oxford in the year 87, he said chattily, I fancied myself in love with the female assistant at a tobacconist's shop. Desperately in love, damn it. Wanted to marry her. I recollect my poor father took me away from Oxford and kept me here at Belfour under lock and key. Lock and key, damn it. I was decidedly upset at the time, I remember. His mind wandered off into the glorious past. I wonder what that girl's name was. Odd one can't remember names. She had chestnut hair and a mole on the side of her chin. I used to kiss it, I recollect. Lady Caroline, usually such an advocate for her brother's researches into family history, cut the reminiscences short. Never mind that now. I don't. I got over it. That's the moral. Well, said Lady Caroline, at any rate, poor father acted with great good sense on that occasion. There seems nothing to do but to treat Maud in the same way. You shall not stir a step from the castle till you have got over this dreadful infatuation. You will be watched. I shall be watched. I shall watch you, said Lord Belpher solemnly. I shall watch your every movement. A dreamy look came into Maud's brown eyes. Stone walls do not a prison make, nor iron bars a cage, she said softly. That wasn't your experience, Percy, my boy, said Lord Marshmoreton. They make a very good imitation, said Lady Caroline, coldly ignoring the interruption. Maud faced her defiantly. She looked like a princess in captivity facing her galliers. I don't care. I love him, and I always shall love him, and nothing is ever going to stop me loving him because I love him, she concluded a little lamely. Nonsense, said Lady Caroline. In a year from now, you will have forgotten his name. Don't you agree, Percy? Quite, said Lord Belpher. I shan't. Deuced hard things to remember names, said Lord Marshmoreton. If I've tried once to remember that tobacconist's girl's name, I've tried 100 times. I have an idea it began with an L, Muriel or Hilda or something. Within a year, said Lady Caroline, you will be wondering how you ever came to be so foolish. Don't you think so, Percy? Quite, said Lord Belpher. Lord Marshmoreton turned on him irritably. Good God, boy, can't you answer a simple question with a plain affirmative? What do you mean, quite? If somebody came to me and pointed you out and said, is that your son, do you suppose I should say, quite? I wish the devil you didn't collect prayer rugs. It's sapped your brain. They say prison life often weakens the intellect, Father, said Maud. She moved towards the door and turned the handle. Albert, the page boy, who had been courting earache by listening at the keyhole, straightened his small body and scuttled away. Well, is that all, Aunt Caroline? May I go now? Certainly. I have said all I wish to say. Very well, I'm sorry to disobey you, but I can't help it. You'll find you can help it after you've been cooped up here for a few more months, said Percy. A gentle smile played over Maud's face. Love laughs at locksmiths, she murmured softly, and passed from the room. What did she say? Asked Lord Marshmoreton, interested. Something about somebody laughing at a locksmith. I don't understand. Why should anyone laugh at locksmiths? Most respectable men. Had one up here the other day, before yesterday, forcing open the drawer of my desk. Watched him do it. Most interesting. He smelt rather strongly of a damned bad brand of tobacco. Fellow must have a throat of leather to be able to smoke that stuff. But he didn't strike me as an object of derision. From first to last, I was never tempted to laugh. Lord Belpher wandered moodily to the window and looked out into the gathering darkness. And this has to happen, he said bitterly, on the eve of my 21st birthday. Chapter 7. The first requisite of an invading army is a base. George, having entered Belpher village and thus accomplished the first stage in his forward movement on the castle, selected as his base the Marshmoreton Arms. Select is perhaps hardly the right word, as it implies choice. And in George's case, there is no choice. There are two inns at Belpher, but the Marshmoreton Arms is the only one that offers accommodation for man and beast, assuming, that is to say, that the man and the beast desire to spend the night. The other house, the Blue Boar, is a mere beer house, where the lower strata of the Belpher society gather at night to quench their thirst and to tell one another interminable stories without any point whatsoever. But the Marshmoreton Arms is a comfortable, respectable hostelry, catering for the village plutocrats. There, of an evening, you will find the local veterinary surgeon smoking a pipe with the grocer, the baker, and the butcher, and perhaps a sprinkling of neighboring farmers to help the conversation along. On Saturdays, there is a shilling ordinary, which is rural English for a cut off the joint and a boiled potato, following by hunks of the sort of cheese which believes that it pays to advertise, and this is usually well attended. On the other days of the week, until late in the evening, however, the visitor at the Marshmoreton Arms has the place almost entirely to himself. It is to be questioned whether the whole length and breadth of the world there is a more admirable spot for a man to love to pass a day or two than the typical English village. The Rocky Mountains, that traditional stamping ground for the heartbroken, may well be enough in their way, but a lover has always to be cast in a pretty stern mold to be able to be introspective when at any moment he may meet an annoyed cinnamon bear. In the English village, there are no such obstacles to meditation. It combines the comforts of civilization with the restfulness of solitude in a manner equaled by no other spot except the New York Public Library. Here your lover may wander to and fro unmolested, speaking to nobody, by nobody addressed, and having the satisfaction at the end of the day of sitting down to a capitally cooked chop, and chips, lubricated by golden English ale. Belpher, in addition to all the advantages of the usual village, has a quiet charm all its own, due to the fact that it has seen better days. In a sense, it is a ruin, and ruins are always soothing to the bruised soul. 10 years before, Belpher had been a flourishing centre of the south of England, oyster trade specifically. It is situated by the shore, where the Hayling Island, lying athwart the mouth of the bay, forms the waters into a short brackish lagoon, in much of the same way as Fire Island shuts off the great South Bay of Long Island from the waves of the Atlantic. The water of Belpher Creek is shallow even at high tide, and when the tide runs out, it leaves glistening mudflats, which it is the peculiar taste of the oyster to prefer to any other habitation. For years, Belpher oysters had been the mainstay of gay supper parties at the Savoy and the Carlton, as well as Romano's. Dukes devoted on them. Dukes doted on them. Chorus girls wept if they were not on the bill of fare. And then, in the evil hour, somebody discovered that what made the Belpher oyster so particularly plump and succulent was the fact that it breakfasted, lunched, and dined almost entirely on the local sewage. There is but a thin line ever between popular homage and execration. We see it in the cases of politicians, generals, and prize fighters, and oysters are no exception to the rule. There was a typhoid scare, quite passing and unjustified scare, but strong enough to do its deadly work, and almost overnight, Belpher passed from a place of flourishing industry to the sleepy, by the world forgotten spot by which it was when George Bevan discovered it. The shallow water is still there, the mud is still there, even the oyster beds are still there, but not the oysters nor the little world of activity which had sprung up around them. The glory of Belpher is dead, and there, over its gates, Ichabod is written. But if it is lost in importance, it has gained in charm, and George, for one, had no regrets. To him, in its present state of mental upheaval, Belpher was the ideal spot. It was not at first that George roused himself to the point of asking why he was there and what now that was to be done there. He proposed to do it, whatever it be. For 2 languorous days he loafed sufficiently, occupied with his thoughts. He smoked long, peaceful pipes in the stable yard, watching the oysters as they groomed the horses. He played with the inn puppy, bestowed respectful caresses on the inn cat. He walked down the quaint cobbled streets to the harbor. He sauntered along the shore, and he lay on his back on the little beach at the other side of the lagoon, from where he could see the red roofs of the village, while the imitation waves splashed busily on the stones, trying to conceal with bustle and energy the fact that the water, even 200 yards from the shore, was only 18 inches deep. For it is the abiding hope of Belpher Creek that it may be able to deceive the occasional visitor into making it for the open sea. At presently the tides would ebb. The waste of waters became the sea of mud, cheerfully covered as to much of its surface with green grasses. The evening sun struck rainbow colors from the moist softness. Birds sang in the thickets, and George, heaving himself up, walked back to the friendly coziness of the Marshmoreton Arms. And the remarkable part of it was that everything seemed perfectly natural and sensible to him, nor had he any particular feeling that in falling in love with Lady Maud Marsh and pursuing her to the Belpher, he had set himself anything in the nature of a hopeless task. Like one kissed by a goddess in a dream, he walked on air, and while one is walking on air, it is easy to overlook the boulders in the path. Consider his position. You faint-hearted and self-pitying young men who think you have tough row to hoe, just because when you pay your evening visit with a pound box of chocolate under your arm, you see the handsome sophomore from Yale sitting beside her on the porch, playing the ukulele. If ever the world has turned black to you in such a situation, the moon gone in behind a cloud, think of George Bevan and what he was up against. You are at least on the spot. You can at least put up a fight. If there are ukuleles in the world, there are also guitars, and tomorrow it may be you and not the one who sits on the moonlit porch. It may be he and not you who arrives late. Who knows? Tomorrow he may not show up till you have finished the Bedouin's love song and are annoying the local birds roosting in the trees with poor butterfly. What I mean to say is that you are on the map. You have a sporting chance, whereas George, well, just go over to England and try wooing an earl's daughter whom you have only met once, and then without an introduction, whose brother's hat you have smashed beyond repair, whose family wishes her to marry some other man, who wants to marry some other man herself, and not the same other man, but another other man who is closely immured in a medieval castle. Well, all I say is try it, and then go back to your porch with a chastened spirit and admit that you might be a whole lot worse off. George, as I say, had not envisioned the peculiar difficulties of his position, nor did he until the evening of his second day at Marshmoreton Arms. Until then, as I have indicated, he roamed in a golden mist of dreamy meditation among the soothing byways of the village Belpher. But after lunch on the second day, it came upon him that all this sort of thing was pleasant but not practical. Action was what was needed. Yes, action. The first, the obvious move, was to locate the castle. Inquiries at Marshmoreton Arms elicited the fact that it was a step on the road that ran past the front door of the inn. But this wasn't the day of the week when the general public was admitted. The sightseer could invade Belpher Castle on Thursdays only, between the hours of 2 and 4. On the other days of the week, all he could do was stand like Moses and take in the general effect from the distance. As this was all that George had hoped to be able to do, he set forth. It speedily became evident to George that a step was a euphemism. 5 miles did he tramp before trudging wearily up the winding lane. He came out on a breeze-swept hilltop and saw below him, nestling in the trees, what was now for him the center of the world. He sat on a stone wall and lit a pipe. Belpher Castle, Maud's home. There it was. And now what? The first thought that came to him was practical, even prosaic. The thought that he couldn't possibly do this 5 miles there and 5 miles backwalk every time he wanted to see the place. He must shift his base nearer to the scene of operations. One of those trim thatched cottages down there in the valley would be just the thing if he could arrange to take possession of it. They sat there all round the castle, singingly and in groups, like small dogs round their master. They looked as if they had been there for centuries. Probably they had, as they were made of stone, as solid as the castle. There must have been a time, thought George, when the castle was the central rallying point for all those scattered homes, when the rumor of danger from marauders had sent that little community scuttling for safety to the sheltering walls. For the first time since he had set out on his expedition, a certain chill, a discomforting sinking of the heart affected George as he gazed down at the grim gray fortress which he had undertaken to storm. So must have felt those marauders of old when they climbed to the top of this very hill to spy out the land. And George's case was even worse than theirs. They could at least hope that a strong arm and stout heart would carry them past the solid walls. They had not to think of social etiquette. Whereas George was so situated that an unsympathetic butler could put him to rout by refusing him admittance. The evening was drawing in. Already, in the brief time he had spent on the hilltop, the sky had turned from blue to saffron, and from saffron to gray. The plaintive voices of homing cows floated up to him from the valley below. A bat had left its shelter and was wheeling around him. A sinister blot against the sky. A sickle moon gleamed over the trees. George felt cold. He turned. The shadows of night wrapped him round. Little things in the hedgerows chirped and chittered mockery at him as he stumbled down the lane. George's request for a lonely, furnished cottage somewhere in the neighborhood of the castle did not, as he had feared, strike the Belpher house agent as the demand of a lunatic. Every well-dressed stranger who comes to Belpher is automatically set down by the natives as an artist, for the picturesqueness of the place has caused it to be much infested by the brothers and sisters of the brush. In asking for a cottage, indeed, George did precisely as Belpher society expected him to do. And the agent was reaching for his list almost before the words were out of his mouth. In less than half an hour, George was out of the street again, the owner for the season of what the agent described as a gem, and the employer of a farmer whose wife lived nearby, would, as was her custom with artists, come in the morning and the evening to do for him. The interview would have taken but a few minutes, but it had not been prolonged by the chattiness of the agent, on whom the subject of the occupants of the castle, to which George listened attentively. He was not greatly encouraged by what he heard of Lord Marshmoreton. The Earl had made himself notably unpopular in the village recently by his firm, the house agent said, pig-headed attitude in respect to a certain dispute about a right-of-way. It was Lady Caroline, and not the easy-going peer, who was really to blame in the matter. But the impression that George got from the house agent's description of Lord Marshmoreton was that the latter was a sort of Nero, possessing, in addition to the qualities of a Roman tyrant, many of the least lovable traits of the Gila monster of Arizona. Hearing this about her father, and having already had the privilege of meeting her brother and studying him at first hand, his heart bled for Maud. It seemed to him that the existence at the castle in such society must be a little short of torture. I must do something, he muttered. I must do something quick. Beg pardon, said the house agent. Nothing, said George. Well, I'll take that cottage. I'd better write you a check for the first month's rent now. So George took up his abode, full of strenuous if vague purpose, in the plainly furnished but not uncomfortable cottage known locally as one of the down by Platts. He might have found a worse billet. It was a 2-storied building of stained red brick, not one of the thatched nests on which he had looked down from the hill. Those were not for rent, being occupied by families whose ancestors had occupied them 4 generations back. The one down by Platts was a more modern structure, a speculation, in fact, of the farmer whose wife came to do for George, and designed especially to accommodate the stranger who had the desire and the money to rent it. It so departed from the type that it possessed a small but undeniable bathroom. Besides this miracle, there was a cozy sitting room, a larger bedroom on the floor above the next to an empty room facing the north, which had evidently served as an artist's occupant's studio. The remainder of the ground floor was taken up by the kitchen and scullery. The furniture had been constructed by somebody who would probably have done very well if he had taken up some other line of industry, but it was mitigated by a very fine and comfortable wicker chair, left there by one of the last artists, and other artists who had helped along the good work by relieving the plainness of the walls with a landscape or two. In fact, when George had removed from the room two anti-maskers, three group photographs of the farmers' relations, an illuminated text, and a china statuette of the infant Samuel, and stacked them in a corner of an empty studio, the place became almost a home from home. Solitude can be very unsolitary if a man is in love. George never even began to be bored. The only thing that is in the way of that is any way troubled his peace was the thought that he was not accomplishing a great deal in the matter of helping Maud out of whatever trouble it was that had befallen her. The most he could do was to prowl about the roads near the castle in hopes of accidentally meeting any. Such was his good fortune that, on the fourth day of his vigil, the accidental meeting actually occurred. Taking his morning prowl along the lanes, he was rewarded by the sight of a gray racing car at the side of the road. It was empty, but from underneath it protruded a pair of long legs, while beside it stood a girl, at the sight of whom George's heart began to thump so violently that the long-legged one might have been pardoned had he supposed that his engine had started again of its own volition. Until he spoke of soft grass had kept her from hearing his approach. He stopped close behind her and cleared his throat. She started and turned, and their eyes met. For a moment, hers were empty of any recognition. Then they lit up. She caught her breath quickly, and a faint flush came into her face. "Can I help you?" asked George. The long legs wriggled out from the road, and followed by a long body, the young man under the car sat up, turning a grease-streaked and pleasant face to George. What? "Can I help you? I know how to fix a car." The young man beamed in a friendly fashion. "It's awfully good of you, old chap, but so do I. It's the only thing I can do well. Thanks very much," and so forth, all the same. George fastened his eyes on the girl's. She had not spoken. "If there is anything in the world I can possibly do for you," he said slowly, "I hope you will let me know. I should like above all things to help you." The girl spoke. "Thank you," she said in a low voice, inaudible. George walked away. The grease-streaked young man followed him with his gaze. "Civil cove, that," he said, rather gushing though. "What? American, wasn't he?" "Yes, I think he was. Americans are the civilest coves I've ever struck. I remember asking the way of a chappie at Baltimore a couple of years ago when I was there on my yacht, and he followed me for miles." Shrieking advice and encouragement, I thought it deuced civil of him. "I wish you would hurry up and get the car right, Reggie. We shall be awfully late for lunch." Reggie Byng began to slide backward under the car. All right, dear heart. Rely on me. It's something quite simple." "Well, do be quick." "Imitation of greased lightning. Very difficult," said Reggie encouragingly. "Be patient. Try to amuse yourself somehow. Ask yourself a riddle. Tell yourself a few anecdotes. I'll be with you in a moment. I say, I wonder what the old cove is doing at the Belfer." "Deuced civil cove," said Reggie approvingly. I liked him, and now business of repairing the breakdown. His smiling face vanished under the car like a Cheshire cat. Maud stood looking thoughtfully down the road in the direction in which George had disappeared. And that is the end of chapter 7, my friends, and the end for today. I hope you're enjoying the story, getting to know these characters. I'm starting to get into it the more I learn of each character's personality traits. And of course, now the challenge of young George, the American, trying to meet Maud and get to know her a little better. All right, my friends, this has been Indiana Homes for Storytime. Until next time, love to you all. Bye-bye.
Please hit the like button, subscribe, and hit the notifications button. Thank you very much.